Joseph Heller has had significant literary impact despite the fact that he's published only 2 books. In fact, he would have made his mark with only one of them, Catch-22, which was about the Second World War. More recently, he's brought out Something Happened, about modern corporate life. But when I talked with Mr. Heller in Washington, the relationship between the 2 books became clear to me for the first time. He mentioned, as you'll hear, that first lines or passages come to him almost magically, and that he simply sets them down and works the rest out. I said that his books have the quality of being fugues, which refers basically to musical works in which themes are stated sequentially and develop contrapuntally. That simply means that the melody goes forwards, backwards, every which way, but it all follows logically from the start. So, since the beginnings are so important to Joseph Heller's books, I'll read the opening passages of both of them for the sake of comparison. Notice in both cases how the people become numbers, how the central characters are almost zeros. I'll read the beginning of Something Happened first, and after we hear from Mr. Heller, we'll take a look at Catch-22. In the office in which I work, there are 5 people of whom I'm afraid. Each of these 5 people is afraid of 4 people, excluding overlaps, for a total of 20. And each of these 20 people is afraid of 6 people, making a total of 120 people who are feared by at least one person. Each of these 120 people is afraid of the other 119, and all of these 145 people are afraid of the 12 men at the top who helped found and build the company and now own and direct it. All these 12 men are elderly now and drained by time and successive energy and ambition. Many have spent their whole lives here. They seem friendly, slow, and content when I come upon them in the halls. They seem dead, and are always courteous and mute when they ride with others in the public elevators. They no longer work hard. They hold meetings, make promotions, and allow their names to be used on announcements that are prepared and issued by somebody else. Nobody is sure anymore who really runs the company, not even the people who are credited with running it. But the company does run. Sometimes these 12 men at the top work for the government for a little while. They don't seem interested in doing much more. 2 of them know what I do and recognize me because I've helped them in the past, and they've been kind enough to remember me, although not, I'm sure, by name. They inevitably smile when they see me and say, "How are you?" I inevitably nod and respond, "Fine." Since I have little contact with these 12 men at the top and see them seldom, I'm not really afraid of them. But most of the people I'm afraid of in the company are. Just about everybody in the company is afraid of somebody else in the company, and I sometimes think I'm a cowering boy back in the automobile casualty insurance company for which I used to work very long ago, sorting and filing automobile accident reports after Mrs. Yerger was placed in charge of the file room and kept threatening daily to fire us all. She was a positive, large woman of overbearing confidence and nasty amiability, who never doubted the wisdom of her biases. A witty older girl named Virginia sat under a big Western Union clock in that office and traded dirty jokes with me. "My name's Virginia, Virgin for short, but not for long, ha-ha." She was peppy and direct, always laughing and teasing, with me anyway. And I was too young and dumb then to see that she wasn't just joking. Good God, she used to ask me to get a room for us somewhere, and I didn't even know how. She was extremely pretty, I think, now, although I'm not sure I thought so then. But I did like her, and she got me hot. Her father had killed himself a few years before. Much went on there in that company, too, that I didn't know about. Virginia herself had told me that one of the married claims adjusters had taken her out in his car one night, turned insistent, and threatened to rape her or put her out near a cemetery until she pretended to start to cry. I was afraid to open doors in that company, too, I remember, even when I had been sent for by one of the lawyers or adjusters to bring in an important file or a sandwich. I was never sure whether to knock or walk right in, to tap deferentially or rap loudly enough to be heard at once and command admission. Either way, I would often encounter expressions of annoyance and impatience, or feel I did. I had arrived too soon or arrived too late. Mr. Heller, what similarities are there between an office, a large company, and a worldwide war?
Oh, well, it's a question I have been asked before, and if I answer too quickly, it's going to be an answer to which I have not given much thought. Let me say this, between the two books, there's consciously an effort to have the second book be unlike the first. Each has a style of its own, and Something Happened is deliberately different from Catch-22 because I didn't want to repeat myself. Now, addressing myself to your question, the similarities are there. I mean, the similarity between a war and a peace. Peacetime, it would be the same in the sense that there are rules, there are regulations, there are systems of authority, there are choices a person can make, or at least choices that a person at one time in his life had the option of making, of obeying or not obeying, of conforming or non-conforming. So Yossarian in the army in Catch-22 is brought to a choice whether he can remain subservient, obedient, and do what he's told to do, even though he's being told to do it by people who are fools and perfectly ambitious and have no consideration for him, or refuse to do it. And he has that choice, and he acts upon it, and he chooses in the direction of free will. In Something Happened, we have a man in a corporation making a good income, unhappy in his work, though successful, and unhappy in his marriage, unable to get along with his children, even though he's successful. And he, too, could have made the choice, although in Something Happened, Bob Slocum, the character, I think I pick him up when he's beyond the point of choice. He has to keep doing what he's going to do. So the similarities are there. They're not only there in War and Peace, but they're there in war, they're there in peace, they're there in life, they're there with children in school.
For a moment, I thought you were comparing yourself to Tolstoy.
I wasn't comparing myself to Tolstoy, but what made you think that?
War and Peace.
Oh, I see. No.
Let me make a suggestion, which is really what was in the back of my mind when I asked the question originally, and that is that the similarity between a large office and a war is that your main characters anyway, Slocum and Yossarian, are terrified, and that the system, either directly or indirectly, is responsible for their terror.
In Catch-22, the system is directly responsible for the fear, the fear of death that Yossarian experiences, and the fear of moral destruction that it will impose upon him through, again, systems of authority that provide no legitimate avenue of relief. In Something Happened, I would say there's not the threat of actual death that's bothering Slocum, but spiritual disintegration, emotional disintegration.
That's just as frightening.
Oh, yeah, it's much more frightening. But in Something Happened, there is nothing specific that I give that enables Slocum to recognize as the source of danger. Now, in Catch-22, there were the German anti-aircraft gunners first. They're threatening to shoot him down. Then there's his own commanding officer who wants to compile good photographs for public relations purposes and wants to be made a general. So Yossarian is able to locate the source of the dangers that press upon him, the emotional ones and the very real physical ones. In Something Happened, there's a vague source of anxiety. Slocum does not know what it is that has brought him to this position in life where he has everything he's always wanted and yet feels a sense of loss, a sense of loneliness, an inability to thrive emotionally. Now, one thing Yossarian does have is he is emotionally expressive. He's sensitive. He has appetites. Bob Slocum is almost impoverished. And the reason that there's a lot of care in my choosing the title, Something Happened. Something is such a vague word. Slocum is trying to find out what did happen to him, what happened to that little boy I used to be, and he can't find out. In fact, I've constructed the book in a way so that no one interpretation would explain it, and that, I think, is the contemporary condition. Not just
but you'll grant me that both your main characters are running terribly scared.
Scared, but in different ways. Yossarian is scared of very real things.
But you're fascinated, I think, with fright.
I'm not fascinated with it. Fear, as war and as crime, are good subjects for literature.
Yeah. Another point of comparison, I think, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, but a music student might say that both your books have a quality of being like a fugue, in the sense that the situation is stated, and the rest of it almost seems to be inherent or inevitable given the situation.
Well, structurally, I can see what you mean. There would be a fugal quality to it, in the sense that most of what's happened in each book has taken place before the beginning of the book, and the character, in Yossarian, I am the main character, and I will bring the reader back to certain events each time, adding. It's a structure that William Faulkner used very well. I didn't originate it. And something happened. I'm more concerned with the workings of a mind, particularly memory. I think memory is the biggest character in Something Happened. And the organization of Something Happened works the way I imagine memory works in other people. Now, as we keep returning to certain periods in our life, there may be 4, 5, or 6 or certain people who, for one reason or another, made very deep impressions on us as we grew up, as a child, as an adolescent, as a young man. And consequently, Slocum, with memory as the transporting device, will return to things in his past and work with his present and future as well. So in that sense, themes are repeated, and I really had a sense of music, more so with Something Happened than with Catch-22, and also a sense of an artist's palette. Very much conscious of spatial relationships of the themes and ideas in Something Happened.
What do you think of the movie MASH and the television series MASH?
I normally don't watch any television series, so I've never seen a television MASH. The movie MASH was amusing in certain respects and not amusing in others. To me, it's...
Didn't have any particular relevance to you as the author of Catch-22?
No. I mean, the relevance was this, that it came out about 3 or 4 months before the movie of Catch-22 came out and got such good reviews that it made comparisons inevitable with the movie Catch-22. But I had nothing to do with the movie Catch-22, but I was sensitive in that respect. My feeling about MASH is that it's not about anything. It wasn't about war. It wasn't about medicine. The funniest part in MASH was the football game, and that's one I liked very much, but it was not about anything, whereas I think Mike Nichols in the movie Catch-22 is trying very hard and very successfully to make statements of condemnation about certain areas of military, misuses of military authority and the profit motive. He was much more strongly in the movie than I was in the book.
And back to the business about the fugue and the working it out. I heard you quoted as saying that when I write something, the first thing that happens is that a first line comes to me almost in a dream, and then it all has to grow out of that.
Well, that's true. It's the way both these novels started. I believe it's...
What are the first lines, by the way?
Well, of Catch-22, it was the first time Yossarian saw the chaplain. He fell madly in love with him. I didn't have the name Yossarian. No, it was love at first sight. The first time Yossarian saw the chaplain, he fell madly in love with him. The time that line came, I didn't have the name Yossarian, but that was pretty much it. Something Happened began with what eventually became the first lines of the second chapter, and that is, in the office in which I work, there are 5 people of whom I am afraid. Each of these 5 people is afraid of 4 people for a total of 20. Each of these 20 is afraid of 6 people. Now, that's...
You can see the almost crossword puzzle aspect of it, to work it out.
Well, that occurred to me, and then it just kept building. And then after about 15 minutes, I had almost the whole story of Something Happened. And then I knew I was going to write the book someday. Let me say this, that I get many first lines that don't go anywhere, so it's not quite that easy.
Well, maybe you'd like to toss out a few. Maybe we can work on them in our spare time.
No, it's an unusual way to get an idea for now, but it is true.
But the way you say it, I mean, I really must question this, because you say it as though there was some sort of magical process, and that somebody delivered it to you, maybe a deity.
I don't...
or a devil.
No, I would say it's, in my case, it is a magical process, but it's a process of the imagination, and I don't understand imagination any more than any brain researcher does. I don't know where the ideas come from, where the characters come from, where the what might be called the inspiration comes from. But I don't begin with a subject in mind. I don't think I could write a decent book that way. I didn't decide if Something Happened to write a book about contemporary life, modern business world, or contemporary marriage. And with Catch-22, I didn't start out by saying, well, okay, I'm going to write a book about war, and I'm going to set it in World War II, but it's going to be about the next war. It didn't start that way. I think in each case, I said, well, I think Catch-22, I think I'm able to start writing a novel. Now, what should the novel be? And I had no subject. If anything, it should have been about an ex-college teacher, an ex-college student who was working in advertising, because that was my position at that time. But what happened was I just let my mind go, and those were the lines that came, and the same thing happened 8 or 9 years later with Something Happened.
In a commercial sense, Catch-22 is one of the wonders of the book publishing world. I think it started slowly and then it built enormously. Yeah. How has Something Happened compared?
Well, Something Happened is a miracle, and financially, it was on the Times bestseller list and was number 1 and 2 for a total of 28 weeks. Catch-22 was never on any bestseller list. Something Happened. Had the advantage for me of riding on the familiarity and great affection of Catch-22 had developed by the time Something Happened. It's selling a tremendous number of copies. So
is there a movie in the works?
Not yet, but it's odd that only last week a director got in touch with me and said he wanted to do the movie, and we discussed it, and I said, fine, if he can. I don't want to write the script, and his preference would have been for me to write it, but I said no. And if he can find a writer and he thinks he can get backing from the studio, so there would be a movie.
We have war in your first book, office life in your second book. I'm wondering what will be the dominant image in your third.
I have an idea. I mean, I've already started the next book, and I don't know. Because it changes as I start writing it, but it will have to do with Washington D.C. and politics and college professors who get appointments to be advisors to presidents and then screw things up in a way that only an ignoramus could.
Thus, Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22 and Something Happened. I said earlier that I thought his works have the quality of a fugue, and I gave the musical definition. But my dictionary also gives a second meaning for fugue, a pathological amnesiac condition in which the patient is apparently conscious of his actions, but on return to normal has no recollection of them. Here is the opening passage from Catch-22 that Heller said inspired him. It was love at first sight. The first time Yossarian saw the chaplain, he fell madly in love with him. Yossarian was in the hospital with a pain in his liver that fell just short of being jaundice. The doctors were puzzled by the fact that it wasn't quite jaundice. If it became jaundice, they could treat it. If it didn't become jaundice and went away, they could discharge him. But this just being short of jaundice all the time confused them. Each morning they came around, 3 brisk and serious men with efficient mouths and inefficient eyes, accompanied by brisk and serious Nurse Duckett, one of the ward nurses who didn't like Yossarian. They read the chart at the foot of the bed and asked impatiently about the pain. They seemed irritated when he told them it was exactly the same. Still no movement, the full colonel demanded. The doctors exchanged a look when he shook his head. Give him another pill. Nurse Duckett made a note to give Yossarian another pill, and the 4 of them moved along to the next bed. None of the nurses liked Yossarian. Actually, the pain in his liver had gone away. But Yossarian didn't say anything, and the doctors never suspected. They just suspected that he'd been moving his bowels and not telling anyone. Yossarian had everything he wanted in the hospital. The food wasn't too bad, and his meals were brought to him in bed. There were extra rations of fresh meat, and during the hot part of the afternoon, he and the others were served chilled fruit juice or chilled chocolate milk. Apart from the doctors and the nurses, no one ever disturbed him. For a little while in the morning, he had to censor letters, but he was free after that to spend the rest of each day lying around idly with a clear conscience. He was comfortable in the hospital, and it was easy to stay on because he always ran a temperature of 101. He was even more comfortable than Dunbar, who had to keep falling down on his face in order to get his meals brought to him in bed. After he made up his mind to spend the rest of the war in the hospital, Yossarian wrote letters to everyone he knew saying that he was in the hospital, but never mentioning why. One day he had a better idea. To everyone he knew, he wrote that he was going on a very dangerous mission. They asked for volunteers. It's very dangerous, but someone has to do it. I'll write you the instant I get back. And he had not written to anyone since. All the officer patients in the ward were forced to censor letters written by all the enlisted men patients who were kept in residence in wards of their own. It was a monotonous job, and Yossarian was disappointed to learn that the lives of enlisted men were only slightly more interesting than the lives of officers. After the first day, he had no curiosity at all. To break the monotony, he invented games. Death to all modifiers, he declared one day, and out of every letter that passed through his hands went every adverb and every adjective. The next day, he made war in articles. He reached a much higher plane of creativity the following day when he blacked out everything in the letter but a, an, and the. That erected more dynamic intralinear tensions, he felt, and in just about every case left a message far more universal. Soon he was proscribing parts of salutations and signatures and leaving the text untouched. One time he blacked out all but the salutation, Dear Mary, from a letter, and at the bottom he wrote, I yearn for you tragically, A.T. Tapman, Chaplain, U.S. Army.
A.T. Tapman was the group chaplain's name. When he had exhausted all possibilities in the letters, he began attacking the names and addresses on the envelopes, obliterating whole homes and streets, annihilating entire metropolises with careless flicks of his wrist as though he were God. Catch-22 required that each censored letter bear the censoring officer's name. Most letters he didn't read at all. On those he didn't read at all, he wrote his own name. On those he did read, he wrote Washington Irving. When that grew monotonous, he wrote Irving Washington. Censoring the envelopes had serious repercussions, produced a ripple of anxiety on some ethereal military echelon that floated a CID man back into the ward, posing as a patient. They all knew he was a CID man because he kept inquiring about an officer named Irving or Washington, and because after his first day there he wouldn't censor letters. He found them too monotonous.